Hey, everybody. I wish I could see you guys. I love seeing all your faces, but I'm so glad that you're here again to join me. For those of you who may have been in some of my other classes, welcome back. If this is your first time in a class with me, I'm excited. We're going to be drawing some elephants today, an elephant. I'm really looking forward to it. Again, my name is Nick Mikesell. I am one of the design managers here at Michaels. And you know, it's fun working here. I really enjoy it. But today, what we're going to be, as I'm going to be walking you through how to draw this elephant, we're going to be celebrating endangered species. Tomorrow is actually National Endangered Species Awareness Day. And to commemorate that, I am going to be showing you how to draw an Asian elephant. But before we get to that, just a few facts, because I think that it would be a disservice to talk about endangered species and talk about the Asian elephant without giving you a few facts. And these facts that I have, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a biologist by any means, but I pulled a few facts off of the World Wildlife Fund website. I wrote those down. So I just want to share these with you so you know a little bit more about the Asian elephant. And I promise you, we will get into drawing in a second. So according to the World Wildlife Fund website, the Asian elephant is the largest mammal on the Asian continent, and there are fewer than 50,000 in the wild. They can reach a height of 11.5 feet. That's pretty tall. Now, that's twice as tall as I am. And they can weigh as much as 11,000 pounds. That's a lot. They're very sociable animals. They love living in groups of about 6 to 7 related females, and they're led by the oldest female, the matriarch. 2/3 of their day is spent feeding on grasses, tree bark, roots, leaves, and small stems, but they also really like bananas, rice, and sugarcane. And then finally, they always stay close to water, to a fresh water source, because they need to drink at least once a day. And I just saw an Asian elephant myself a couple days ago here. Located in Dallas, Fort Worth in Texas. And I went to the Fort Worth Zoo with my daughter and my wife, and we saw Asian elephants there, and they're really cool. They've got really long legs. It's really neat. Okay, so I hope you've learned something about the Asian elephant. Now let's start drawing one. Jimena, if you want to go ahead and switch to the overhead. So what I have here, this is a drawing that I've already done, that I've already completed of an Asian elephant. And I'm going to walk you guys through step by step how to do this. But before I get into that, I would like to introduce you to a few of my favorite trusty tools that I use for drawing. Now, if you have a pencil, a paper, and an eraser at home, you're good to go. You're perfect. You don't have to have these tools that I have. I just want to show you what it is that I like to use. Because this is a fancy looking pencil that I have in my hand. It's actually called a lead holder. We sell these at Michaels, and they're produced by a company named Staedtler. And what they do is they're called a lead holder because they hold these leads. And these leads right here, we also sell these online and at our Michaels stores. These are also produced by Staedtler. These are what I use to draw. So the nice thing about using a lead holder is that your pencil never gets sharp or never gets short as you sharpen it. So that's why I love using these pencils. To make the lead sharp, I use this lead sharpener. This is a lead pointer, rather, I should say. I'm not going to get into really a lot of the details about this, but this is the tool that I use to sharpen my leads. And then I have a couple of erasers that I use as well. I have a click eraser that I use to, and again, everything that I'm showing you here, probably outside of my brush, you can purchase at Michaels or on michaels.com. And I provided a materials list on the sign up on the website. So you probably saw that there. So the couple of erasers that I have here, this is a click eraser, like I said. I use that to really fully erase large areas and to completely remove lead marks from my paper. And then I also have this, which is called a kneaded eraser. Have any of you seen this before? I talk about these always in my classes. They're really great. I usually keep one in my hand to keep it warm and pliable. You can pull it and shape it into a point. And these are really great for lightening. You use this kneaded eraser if you've gone too dark on your lines or your drawing. You can use this kneaded eraser to lift it up and make things lighter. Okay, and then like I said, I have this little brush. I have this brush right here. And what I use that for is that whenever I'm erasing, you can get the little eraser dust or the eraser chaff. And I use that to kind of swipe it away so I don't mess up my drawing. Okay. And as far as the paper is concerned, I am just using your basic 11 by 17. This is an 11 by 17 or tab light size paper. That's just your regular printer paper. So no fancy paper. You can have sketch paper. If you have the letter size paper, like that's this size right here from home, that works fine too. That's perfectly fine for what we're doing today.
Nick,
yes.
Sorry, one question about the paper. Does it matter if it's horizontal or vertical?
For this, horizontal would be best. So if you have an 8.5 by 11 letter sheet paper, yeah, let's work horizontally today. Just because if you look at the drawing here that I've already created with the elephant, it's longer this way horizontally than it is vertically. So that's why we're doing it with that orientation. That is great. That's a great question. Okay, just to walk you really quick through some techniques, some quick techniques for drawing. I do this with every one of my classes. Let me switch the paper here real quick. So when we're drawing, what's really important to keep in mind is the amount of pressure that you are applying to the paper with your drawing tool, with whether it's pencil or a pen. Because when you go with lighter pressure, your lines will look lighter, obviously. You can't see that, but if I hold it up, you should be able to see like how really light those are. And these type of lines where we're doing really light pressure and we're more or less letting the pencil glide across the surface of the paper and leaving its mark. That's what we do when we're first starting out drawing. We're creating those finding lines. And before I continue, if I'm going too fast, I want to apologize. I've got an hour and I really want to be able to finish my drawing for you guys and walk you through it within the hour. But as Jimena had said at the beginning of the class, just as a reminder, this class is being recorded. So you can watch it back on the Michaels YouTube channel or on the Michaels website at your pace. You can pause, you can take notes, and you can follow along a lot closer. So again, apologize if I'm going too fast. So going back to these sketch lines, which are very, very light, they're going to produce those, the marks that we're using at first to get our subject matter on the paper. And then as we get into drawing more of the details, that's when we apply more pressure. And when you apply more pressure, you get lines that are darker and thicker. And it's always good to mix up to your line pressure from light to heavy and also to light again. Because if I'll hold this up so you all can see it, but you can see that that creates a very interesting line where it's thick and it's thin. Okay. So pressure is everything when it comes to drawing. If you press too hard, you're going to go too dark too fast. And we don't want to go too dark too fast. And then when it comes to shading, the same thing with pressure applies to shading. When you're doing lighter strokes across your paper, it's your values or your lights and darks are going to be much lighter. And then as you progressively apply harder pressure, they get lighter. And then subsequently, if you do it the opposite way, it can go from dark to light. So as you can see here really quickly, show you. I mean, that's from lighter pressure to darker, or light pressure to heavier pressure, creating those darker, the darker value here. And that creates that gradient. And this is the kind of thing that we're looking for, this light to dark. That's all important for when we're trying to draw values and shading. Okay.
Hey, Nick,
All
a
right.
couple of things. First of all, we have a question about pencils. So is there any specific pencil that you recommend more for this 2B, 3B, 4B? And also, could you put the drawing of the finished elephant somewhere like in the corner? So
Yeah, absolutely. Let me put it up here so you guys can see
there
it
you go.
up there.
Thank you.
Yep, that'll be better there so that you all can see that as I'm drawing. Okay, question about the pencils. This particular lead, thank you for reminding me. I totally skipped over that and didn't mention what the lead weight that I was using, because pencil leads come in all sorts of different different weights, and the weight will determine the type of mark that your pencil will make. And this particular pencil lead weight that I'm using here is an HB, so that's an HB pencil. And what the H stands for is the hardness of the pencil, and what the B stands for is the blackness or the darkness of the pencil. So some of your pencils, as was called out by Rita, as I can see on the Q&A, she had mentioned what a 2B or a 3B or a 4B pencil is. What this number corresponds to is the actual, the softness, because a B, with a B and the blackness, the higher the number goes, the softer the lead, which means the darker the mark it's going to make. On the opposite, where if you have where you have 2 H's, 4 H's, 6 H's, H referring to the hardness, the higher the number, the harder the pencil is and the lighter the marks that it will make. I like using an HB pencil because it's right in the middle. It's equally hard and equally dark. Your standard what is your number 2 pencil is an HB pencil. So if that's the type of pencil you're using at home right now, that is perfect. Does that answer the question, Jimena?
I think so, yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. I know we're all eager to start drawing, so I want to pull out this guy right here because this is what I had started to show you where we're going to begin. And in these, at the first step of us drawing our Asian elephant, and that's all about shapes. Everything that we draw, or everything that we draw from real life, it all begins with basic shapes. So we're talking about ovals, we're talking about cylinders, we're talking about even rectangles, trapezoids, all of those different shapes. Organic shapes work best, like these ovals, for when we're drawing animals. So as you can see, as I started here with this elephant, it starts out with those basic shapes that are all placed on top of each other. Now, I didn't come up with this out of my head. I didn't print out my reference image, but I like to work from real life when I can, but also from photographic reference. Most artists do. Not a lot of artists just work straight out of their mind. Not that that's wrong. Of course, you can work straight out of your memory. That's perfectly fine. But for me, I like to work from photo reference. So I actually started this elephant from an image that I found online. I just looked it up on my favorite search engine and I just started drawing from it. So I'm going to take you right now really quickly through how to draw all these shapes. And again, going back to pressure, at this stage, as we're drawing and we're drawing these basic shapes, the pressure is very light. It's not going to be very heavy. Let me sharpen my pencil real quick so I have a nice sharp point. That's another great tip, is that always make sure your pencil is sharp. If you have a pencil sharpener or a handheld one at home, just remember to sharpen your pencil often. I'm also going to get a drink of water. My voice is getting a little dry. Okay. So here's what we start and where I like to start. I always like to start in the center of the body. So this big oval right here, that's what I'm going to draw first. So follow along with me as I draw this oval. And one of the things that I also want to encourage you about is don't worry if the shape is not perfect, or if it doesn't look exactly like mine, or if it doesn't really look exactly like the photo that you're working from. Because honestly, the way you draw, it's your style and it's the way it's going to look. And it's uniquely you and it's uniquely yours. Your drawing is not going to come out looking like mine, and mine's not going to look like yours, but it's still going to be a nice looking drawing. It's still going to be fun because it's something we made. So I started out by drawing this oval right here, and that's representative of the body. And then I'm going to move into the legs. So I'm not starting with the head. Like, I'm not going there first. I'm going with the body because that's the center part. And that's where everything revolves around. Okay, and then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do this front part of the leg. So I'm doing this shape here, which is the upper part of the arm and the shoulder. And then I'm going to do another shorter cylinder down here for the bottom part of the leg, for the forearm. And then I'm going to do another oval down at the bottom here, which is going to, it basically is mapping out the foot. Now, these Asian elephants, they have these really club feet. You know, most elephants do, with their toenails on the outside in here. So I'm also going to just mark very quickly where those toenails are. So let me hold this up close to you so you can see. So that's what I got first. And then now I'm going to go back to the back leg here, this part. I'm going to start with that the upper part of the high leg back here and draw that in as a kind of like a tapered oval shape like that, very lightly placing it in. And then we'll, you know what, one of the other things too that I want to make sure I point out that you do is down here at the bottom, this is really good to do, is draw a horizontal line straight across. And the reason why is because then you can get these two front legs here on the same line, on the same horizontal line, so that one doesn't look like it's higher or lower than the other. So I will draw in really quickly the lower part of the leg here on my elephant, and then again another oval for that foot to show the foot in there. And then the toenails, and I'll hold this up so you guys can see. I know it's really hard to see from the distance from my phone to where I'm drawing, so I'm going to hold this up every now and again so you can see how the drawing is turning out. And then again, as we're drawing first, it's light lines. These sketch lines are done lightly, and then as we get into the contour lines and then the more the shading details, will go a little bit darker. So I'm gonna now put in this back leg here, kind of just the club of the foot, and then have it taper up here with this kind of oval, and then over here, like that. So right now at this stage, this doesn't really look like much, and you're probably going, this doesn't look like an elephant. This doesn't look right. But trust me, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get to this drawing or level of detail here on this elephant. Okay, so I'm going to draw in the neck here. It's kind of like a rounded trapezoid of sorts like that. And then I'm going to sketch in the front part of the leg, which is kind of curved up because his leg is kind of, it's raised slightly, like he's taken a step. And then let's draw in his little oval for his club foot. Do we have any questions, Jimena, that I can answer? while I'm doing this?
We just have a question about the sharpener. What kind of sharpener is that?
Oh, yeah, this is a lead pointer. It's a fancy sharpener, I know, but basically it's what I use to sharpen my lead in my lead holder. And there's these two little holes. I don't know if you guys can see them. There's like a hole here and a hole there, and then there's this thing which is like something that you can use to pull the sharpening, the lead dust off of the tip of your lead. But this little hole right here, if you insert the lead into it and then press down, it gives you the perfect length for inserting it in here and sharpening the lead. And that makes it easier to sharpen the lead in there, and just rotates, and there's a sharpener inside of it, and then it creates my point.
Perfect. We have another question about the elephant. So can you draw it in different poses?
Absolutely. This particular pose that I have, like especially with the trunk, you can draw the trunk in different type of pose. Depending on the reference image that you're using, this particular one that I have just has the elephant kind of walking slowly. And that's why it's got its front foot here raised slightly. But again, like elephants with their trunk, the trunk can kind of curve up, it can curve back. I just have this one kind of going slightly forward. But yeah, I mean, you can change up the pose however you want. You could have a tap dancing if you wanted to, if you knew how to do that. I'd have to do something a little bit more cartoonish if I was doing a tap dancing elephant. One other tip that I want to share with you guys is if you have a spare sheet of printer paper or or even a paper towel, put it underneath your hand. If you are right-handed, this helps as you're moving across. Or if you're left-handed too, it just really helps as you're moving across the drawing to keep it from your hand from smudging the drawing underneath. Because if you have pencil marks and your hand goes over it and you're drawing back and forth like this, what happens is that it can smear that lead on there and it can ruin your lines. So I like to have a piece of scrap paper underneath my hand like this to help prevent myself from smudging my drawing. Okay, so I just drew in the neck here. I'm going to start drawing in the head shape, which is a larger oval here. And the thing about these Asian elephants that separates them from the more well-known African element is the shape of their heads and their ears. The heads have a double dome on them, whereas on the Asian elephant, they have a double dome, whereas on the African elephant, they only have one dome. And then the ears on an African elephant are much larger than the Asian elephant. The Asian elephants have smaller ears. So as I just placed in here, going back to our drawing, the oval part for the head. And then what I'm gonna do too, is I'm gonna draw a line, curved line that kind of says the direction of my trunk, the trunk that I'm doing for the elephant. So I kind of did that. As you can see, it's starting to kind of take shape as an elephant, as you can see. I mean, it looks like a very abstract, weird, surrealistic elephant, but there you go. So I just kind of block that in where I'm going to have the snout go. And then I'm going to also mark in where the tusks go. So I have a tusk right here. And then I'm going to kind of define the trunk a little bit more. There's kind of a bump right here. And then I'm going to have the trunk come down. And they're usually pointed at the end of the trunk where they open. The opening is where the nostril, because that's the nose of the elephant. They're more pointed on the top, right here, pointed on the top, and a little bit more rounder on the bottom part of the trunk. And then we'll finish up the trunk following that line that I put in there, have it come up, and then we'll have the bottom part of the mouth in there like that. And then let's mark an oval right here. for where the eye is going to be, where the part of the eye. And I'm also going to draw in this tusk on the other side, his other tusk on the right side, right there. I'll hold this up so you all can see. So see how it's starting to take shape, how it's starting to look more like an elephant? We're getting there. We're getting closer. And this is where all, once we get these foundations and all the body parts placed where we want them to be and where they should be, then we start getting more into the detail. It's going to be easier. So I'm going to mark in now. I want to finish off the back of the neck here because it kind of curves up a little bit more into the shoulder. And then for the ear starts right here. It's kind of like a trapezoid shape. And I'll draw it in and I'll show you guys here in a second that where I placed in the ear. And again, I know I'm really working fast here. You can watch this back. It will be available in 24 hours. So you'll be able to do it at your own pace. So you can see there where I dropped in the ear. And it's kind of like that trapezoid shape, kind of curved trapezoid shape on the top. So our elephant is really taking shape. And before I forget, let's mark in the tail. And the tails of the elephant, again, that's another thing that you can put in any other, you can have it going in any direction, change up the shape. But their tails are tapered and narrow at the base and wider at the top where they connect closer to the body. And then they have a tuft of fur or hair at the bottom of it, almost like a curved paintbrush, if you will. So then I added in the tail there, so you can see it. Okay, so now that we've got our elephant kind of blocked out with all the different shapes and all where we've got the legs, we've got the body, we've got the head, the neck, the tusks, the trunk, and the tail. So now what we can start moving into is doing the darker contour lines, which is almost like tracing. I'm going to move this up here off to the side so that it's still visible for you guys. But going to our finished drawing, the next step is we're going to start drawing. You can see there's a lot of darker lines around the outside of the body, and it's kind of, we're not going to get into the shading or the details yet. We're actually going to just start defining what's known as the contour lines, which are all those dark lines that you see outside of the body, a few in the inside along the ear. That's what we're going to start doing, is we're going to start making those a little bit darker so that the elephant starts taking more shape. Now, I'm right-handed, so I work left to right. If you are left-handed, you would work left to right. And the reason why you would do that is, again, and that's why the paper comes in handy, because I'm working left to right. As I'm working my way back, this is all getting done right over here. And that way I'm not smudging any of this on this side. But for those of you who are left-handed and you're drawing on this side, put that piece of paper underneath your hand, and as you move across, make sure you keep it under there. So this drawing is going to be, as you're following along with me, you're going to have this drawing done. If you don't have that piece of paper under there, like I said, you're going to be smearing it, and it's just going to mess up all your lines, and you don't want to do that. If your drawing is starting to look a little funny, don't worry about it. It's okay. We're just doing it quickly here. Follow this class back again when it's being drawn, or as I'm drawing it, go to our YouTube channel. You can watch back again, and you can watch it back as many times as you want, and pause it and take your time, because I'm going really fast. I mean, this doesn't look anything like this. It's not going to look anything like this, whatever you draw. All right, so let's start.
Sorry, Nick, I'm also telling them that practice makes perfect. You've been drawing for quite a while now. So it's normal for it not to be absolutely perfect the first time.
That's exactly right, Hima. Thank you. So yeah, let's start drawing in our contour lines, which we're going to start using more pressure. And as you use more pressure, what you'll notice is happening as you're drawing in those lines your sketch marks are going to start fading and you're not going to be able to see them as easily. All right, so I'm going to start with the tusks. And here's another trick as you're drawing. Understanding where your light source is coming from is also very, very helpful. My light source is coming from like right up here. So the sunlight is kind of coming down. So that helps you determine the shadows and where the shadows are going to fall. So if your light source is up top, one trick that I like to use is that whenever you're drawing a shape, the contour line on the bottom, that's furthest away from your light source, I make it thicker and darker than the line on the top, which I make thinner and lighter. And that kind of gives you the illusion, that there's a shadow underneath that tusk. And that's when you start building shape and form. So that's definitely a way to give your drawing more dimension. So let's go over here, finish off that other tusk. I'm going to move quickly because we're at the halfway point and I want to finish this drawing with you guys. So I'm going to talk you through as I'm drawing, and I'm going to be, like I said, I'm going to be moving fast, and I apologize for that, but watch back with me again and then pause it after I do each section. But I'm going to start going in and basically drawing a darker outline and tracing some of those sketch lines that I had first laid down. Now, I'm not doing any shading yet. All I'm doing is creating that darker outline of the elephant so that we can see its shape better. So I'm going around the trunk right now. And then I'm going to make it, again, that tip that I taught you, I'm going to make this bottom part of the trunk darker and the lines thicker than the one on top here, because that gives that illusion of it being of shadow and having it have shape and form. Now I'm going to go underneath the jawline here. Let's make sure we can see our elephant that's finished, so we can look here at the shapes that I made from before. It's kind of got some bumps in here like this. It's not a straight line or a straight curved line going across. And then I'm going to give a little bit of detail to the eye. I'm not going to go this detailed as the eye there. Don't worry, I'll hold this up closer to the camera so you can see it in a second. But the shape of the eye, it's kind of like an almond shape, and it has a lower eyelid and an upper eyelid here. So let me show that to you really quickly so you can see what I did. You see how I did that really fast in there with the eye? But it's got that kind of teardrop, horizontal almond shape to it. And then I have those two curved lines underneath and above to define the upper eyelid and the lower eyelid. And then I'm just going to draw a light circle inside the eye for the eyeball, just right now. And that's it. Okay. So then there's also this part of the skull here that I want to just draw in real quick with a curved line. Then I'm going to move over to my ear. Now the ear is connected in here. So we want to make sure that we give that illusion where keep it there where the ear is attached to the head of the elephant. And with these ears too, they kind of flip over a little bit. They have this like flap on the top here that kind of curves over the top of the ear. And they're really like, it's a big, thick flap of skin that is a little folded over itself. And that's what the ear is. So I want to make these lines a little bit darker underneath. And then I'm going to go into the neck down here. Make it darker. And it's not a straight line coming down or a curved line. It's kind of got a little bump in it right there like that. And then I'm going to start drawing the darker contour line here for the front leg and kind of connect all those shapes together. I forgot to put my toenails in here. I was moving so fast. I'm going to draw those in a little bit darker now. I'm going to do the underneath part of the leg, make it thicker because it's further away from my light source. So put it under there, like that. And let's get, there's some other lines that are in here along the chest that are part of his chest muscles. And I am not an expert on elephant anatomy, but I'm making some guesses here on some of these shapes. And right back here, draw this back part of the upper arm, and then also a curved line here at the top of his shoulder, where his shoulder blade is, just at the top there. And then let's finish off the bottom part of the leg. The legs taper. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but they kind of taper down into the club of the foot. So just want to call that out if you haven't noticed that yet. Draw those toenails darker like this. Get that club foot going. And then I'm going to move on to the back here. Now notice how I'm kind of changing. How I'm moving and rotating my paper, because you'll notice as you learn to draw more that your arm flows better at certain angles than it does. Like, this is hard for me to draw this way straight across, but it's much easier if I rotate this and then I get a nice, cleaner, smoother stroke, because my arm just tends to flow better this way. Now I'm defining the back of the elephant. And let's just go ahead and go into the tail. The back of the tail here, since we're here, we'll just go ahead and do that. Darker, thicker line underneath, narrower, thinner line on the top. And then let's go down here to the belly. Now notice here too, let me pull this up to you. And you can kind of see there's that flap of skin. Let's see, hopefully it won't bend, but there's this little flap of skin here that elephants have that connect to their belly from their back leg. So what we want to do is remember that that's there. So I'm going to kind of mark that in slightly here. And then as we come across with the bottom belly line, I want to make sure that it looks like that flap of skin, as it overlaps where this part of the belly goes underneath, that gives that illusion that this is over this and gives that illusion of that stretch of skin. Okay. Let's get this back leg drawn in. So we're getting really close to having our contour lines done, and then we get to go into the fun stuff, which is the details, getting in there and doing some shading, placing in the shadows, placing in some of those lines along the wrinkle lines along the trunk and also on the legs. Let's get this back leg drawn in. I'm gonna make it thicker along the back here. And then let's get this guy, this leg. This leg turned out a little wonky, but that's okay. It's all right. I'm not entering this drawing into a contest, so it's okay if it's not perfect. All right, let's start working out this back foot. Darker toenails. How are we doing, Jimena? Any questions that I'm missing?
We have questions about adding stuff. So like maybe sun and clouds and all that.
Yes, you can certainly add any type of landscape details you want to your drawing. I'm just doing the elephant because I want to concentrate on the elephant. But if you want to draw some clouds, if you want to draw some grass down here on the ground, some tall grass that maybe he wanted to eat, go for it. You know, put it in there. That was a good question. I like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, let me start. All right, so I've got all my contour lines drawn in, which are basically those darker lines that form the shape of the elephant. Notice how those darker lines, check this out. Remember where we were with our light sketch? Look at how those darker lines, this is like an optical illusion, but they make all those sketch lines start to fade into the background. Like you can barely, they start becoming values like shading, but it's hard to really see those. I just saw a question pop up from Mel. Can you erase those light lines? You can, but I don't like to. I like to keep them in there because it gives your drawing more character. And then when you show it to somebody and you say, hey, this is my elephant drawing, you can see my little sketch lines that I put in there. That's where I started. That's how I started the drawing to get where I was. And again, like I said, they give your drawing a little bit more character. If you want to erase them, sure. If you want to create a cleaner drawing, that's perfectly fine. So let's get into some shading now. We're going to start again. I'm working left to right because I'm right-handed, and I'm keeping this paper underneath my hand so I do not smear my beautiful contour lines that I've already laid down. Let's start with our tusks. And what I want to show you really quickly up here is just a really quick way to make something look like it's curved in space. So the tusks are basically, it's a cylinder. And with our sunlight coming down, or wherever our light source coming down, the top part, as this is curving in space, this top part, that's where your light is hitting. So there's no value up there, right? So I'm gonna shade in here, this bottom part, but I'm gonna leave like the top third of it a little, completely light. So this is, where I start having my shadow. But along this part where it's in the middle, it's actually darker. And this is called the core shadow. And it's a darker part of the shadow where not as much light from our light source is hitting it. And I'm going to blend this down just a little bit. And the reason why this bottom part is lighter is because there's this thing called reflected light. And there's all these other objects all around where the same light source is hitting and light is bouncing everywhere. And as there's an object down here, and as the light comes here, it bounces off of this object. And then it hits and it reflects off the bottom part of that. That's what gives the illusion of form and shape and things kind of going, giving them more weight and like I said, some form to them. So keep that in mind. Always look for reflected light. It's always there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, actually, let me finish off some of the detail here where the tusk is kind of coming out from the mouth, and then there's this lip. It comes up, and this flips over. Let me show you that real quick, what I did, so you can kind of see it. Okay, now let's start drawing in some values, starting with the tusk. And I'm using light pressure, but I'm shading it in by going slightly back and forth. And then just how I said, like there's this darker part right here, I'm going to do a little bit darker along this edge. And I'll hold this up so you can see it. And then let's do the same thing on this side. And it's always good to practice this, practice what I did there. Make some larger shapes and try to shade them in. You see there what I did with the tusks? All right, so let's start shading the trunk. I'm gonna scribble. This type of shading technique that I'm doing is called scrumbling. And that's just moving my pencil back and forth, but notice how I'm changing the position of it and I'm altering it so that I'm following the contour, the lines, the shape of that trunk, because I know it's round. So my lines are following that direction. And then over here, there's those wrinkles that are on the trunk. And basically all that are a bunch of just lines and random lines that are going across. And I'm not being too specific here for the sake of time. but let me show it to you here in a second. So now we're starting to build up a lot of that detail. I see a couple other questions. Do you have to shade the way I'm doing it? No, you can shade it however you feel comfortable shading it. I'm just showing you the technique that I use. This is the way I do it. You know, when you watch back, you know, play it over again and see how I'm moving my pencil and the strokes that I'm making, and try to copy it. Try to emulate what I'm doing, because that's how I did it. When I went to school and when I learned how to draw, basically, I just saw how my instructor was drawing and I tried to copy her. And that's how I learned. I watched her closely, like her pencil strokes and her lines and her line weight and how she manipulated the pencil. And that's what I did. And before you knew it, I was doing this technique too of cross hatching, which is something that I can't stop doing because I've been doing it my entire life, my entire career. All right, so I'm adding in some values here to build up the shapes and the form. I'll hold this close to you so you can see how I'm doing it. I know I'm moving really fast. It's just that we're at almost 10 minutes before the end of the class, and I want to make sure that you guys can see how I'm finishing out this drawing. Now this shadow underneath the ear, I'm actually going to make this darker and heavier. So it's a heavier, harder shadow. So this dark shape that's underneath the ear contrasted against this bottom part of where it's all light. That's what helps to make things look like they, you know, gives them dimension, gives it more dimension, that light against the dark. A couple other questions that I see. The kneaded eraser, that's not, in a way, actually, yeah, it can be for shading because you're using it to lighten. If you want to use to erase your lines, you want to use a click eraser or something that's a harder eraser. That way, because when you use let me just make some marks over here just to address eraser. This will erase your lines completely, right? If you try to do that with a kneaded eraser and you try to erase it completely, I mean, this one's doing actually a pretty good job. I think it's because it's warm. It'll work, but it leaves a little bit of a shadow in there. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it can leave a little bit of a shadow. Ideally, what I use my kneaded eraser for is if I've gone too dark in my drawing, I kind of shape it and then you press it in to lighten, because if you've gone too dark, that's what I use the kneaded eraser for. Can you curve lines to make it look round? Yes, that's what I was doing here along the trunk. I was curving my lines to make it look like, give it the shape that it was round. And can you shade with different types of pencils? Absolutely. I'm just using my HB. I didn't want to overcomplicate things, but generally when I do draw, I tend to use softer pencils to make darker shadows. So I always start out with an HB with my drawing and doing my line and sketching, and then I work my way up as I'm building my values. I'll go into a 2B to build the intermediate values, and then use a 4B or even a 6B or an ebony pencil to create the much darker core shadows. All right, so I'm gonna keep going here. Actually, let's go to our chest. I'll hold this up to you guys in a second so you can see. I'll start building some of the values around here in his chest. And then also right here on his arm, his front right arm. And then right around this is their wrist right here. They have wrinkle lines in their wrists. So I'm going to add some more lines there. And also on the back side to show some of those skin folds. Get a little darker up here. On there. And then on this leg too, there's some lines as well. And I'm using some pressure and making these short stroke lines to kind of give it that look and an impression of it having those wrinkles. And then back in here too along the elbow This is his elbow here. So if you ever look at your own elbow, you got a lot of wrinkly skin along your elbow. And then let's use some cross hatching here along the back side of his arm, which is basically, this is his tricep in here. Give some shading, and then I'm also going to shade the top part here of his shoulder, and then also back here along his neck, just a little bit of shading. And then along the back here, he's got his back, there's actually the way that, and I'm not an expert on elephant anatomy, but they do have their spinal column in here, and it kind of bumps out along the back of the elephant, and then its rib cage is in here, and this part kind of, so there's a difference in values there, and that will kind of help give you more dimension. So I'll show you this in a second. I know that you probably can't see it too well from the overhead. Let me hold this closer. We got about 8 minutes.
While we see that, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So someone's asking, can you use a charker? I'm not sure what that is. I don't know if you know what they're talking about.
Charker. I don't know what a charker is. I've never heard of that. I might have to look that up. I don't know. Maybe you can explain a little bit further.
Okay, I thought you.
Well, I'll have to look that up. I don't know what a charker is. I've never heard it before. But I see there's another question there about explaining cross-hatching. Let me do that real quick.
Yeah.
So what cross-hatching is it's layering of lines. And I'm going to simplify it here so that you can understand. But as you're drawing, you're creating these lines, right? A group of lines. And you're basically layering them over each other at different angles. And that creates value. And the more that you layer over it, the darker it becomes, and I'm giving it more pressure. So this is essentially what cross-hatching is. It's just a group of lines being layered over each other. Now, if I had a softer pencil, I could get this really dark and create more of a gradient in value, but that's basically what cross-hatching is right there.
Perfect. Looks like what they meant by charking is using chalk, but in brown and black shades.
So chalk, let me see. So chalk, I get, for me, I don't use any chalk in my drawings. Like when I'm doing my graphite drawings, I've used chalk in other things, but no, I can't speak to that. Sorry. So I'm just going to keep drawing here and adding more values to the belly of our elephant, our Asian elephant. He's starting to take shape. Let me go back to the eye here and kind of finish this off. I'm going to sharpen my pencil first because it's got to get in there. Coming up
and
on.
So is cross-hatching the way you make the wrinkles look more realistic, or how would you do that?
For all these shapes in here, cross-hatching is a great technique for that, but it's a technique that needs a lot of practice because you don't want your lines to look too flat. You do want to curve your lines, and then you have to learn where to really layer on more lines and less. Scrumbling is a great beginner technique. This is just like the basic, like where I was starting in here. That's a technique that I think you should go after and master first if you're a beginner. I'm going to go in here into the eye and give a little bit more detail. Okay, let me show you real quick. So we got about 5 minutes. Are there any other questions quickly that I can answer before we sign off?
Yes, we have a couple. So smudging on your lines on purpose, what effect would that have on it as far as shading and adding colors?
So smudging is a preference. I don't usually smudge. There are different things. Hold on one second. Let me jump into I'm going to jump into my closet real quick of art supplies, and I'm going to pull something out to show you guys.
Okay.
It's called a, there's a couple of them. I hope you can still hear me. But there are a couple of tools that I like to use for smudging. You have these two different types of smudge sticks. You have a thicker one like this one, and then you have a more thinner pointed one like this. And these are great. You can definitely use these to help you with blending and shading. But I wasn't going to use these for this class. But as you can see, you can use these smudge sticks to help blend out some of your lines. Personally, for me, my preference is to use just to use line because I like the quality that the line leaves rather than having it kind of smudged and smoky like that. I prefer this look personally. For me, this works better for me, where I have all those lines all layered up on top of each other. But it's completely up to you, depending on what you want to do. Practice with both and find out, find out what works best and what you're most comfortable with.
Perfect.
Any other questions I can answer?
Yes, the whole bunch came in right now. So someone's asking, can we use these skills to make other animals?
Of course, yes, absolutely. These are all foundational skills. These are all basic skills for drawing that can be applied to anything.
Perfect. How about adding color?
If you're gonna, I would not color in pencil drawings because if you color them in, they will smudge. If you want to work with color, I would recommend working, with colored pencils and then working exclusively with those. Don't try to put marker over the top of this. Don't try, if you do want to bring a little bit of color into it, before you start bringing some colored pencil into it, spray it with some hairspray so that it will fix all this graphite to the paper. And that way you don't smudge it, because it can get really dirty and ugly if you don't do that. And if you start going in there with a marker, and also you'll dirty the tips of your marker. So I just like to keep my black and white drawings black and white.
Perfect. And I think we have a couple of really good comments. Someone's saving this drawing for Father's Day. A great gift.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Wonderful gift.
they really, really liked your class. Someone's asking a question about, this is for you. So have you ever, or do you like drawing superheroes?
Absolutely. I did. The last class that I taught, I drew superheroes. That was a fun class, but I do love drawing superheroes. Yes. One of my passions. I wanted to be a comic book artist when I was really young, but I ended up here at Michael's and I'm really happy about it.
That is so cool.
Yep.
Someone's saying they were actually in that class. So.
Oh, cool. Yep. That was a real fun class. I would really love to see your drawings, everybody. We're down to 1 minute. Before I forget, make sure before you give that drawing to your dad for Father's Day, you sign it. So make sure you always sign your artwork. Let me hold this up one last time so you all can see what we drew today. I hope you all had fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share your drawings with us. Jimena, what the correct hashtag to use is?
Yes, that would be Make It with Michael's and Michael's Classes. So yes. I'll put those in the chat real fast right before we go. There you are.
But thank you again for joining me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this class. I certainly did. I really enjoyed drawing with you. Have fun drawing your elephants or whatever animal that you want to draw. And I hope to see you guys again soon. So enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you, Nick. Bye.